the floor open. I take 3 questions at a time, right? That would be okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they can direct it to either of them or both of them. So, well, I saw Karahelo Alak behind you, yellow, so right? The suit. Yeah. Sorry. የመጀመሪያ እጅ ስለወጣ ነው አንተ አንድ እሺ ቀጥሎ ሌላ ካንተ ኋላ ሁለት ዶክተር ያዕቆብ 3 ፕሮፌሰር ካሳሁን ፕሮፌሰር ያዕቆብ and ፕሮፌሰር ካሳሁን so 4 questions I will take ማለት ነው from the first one. Yes sir.
Okay, thank you very much Anne and Jeff for your insightful reflections and standing to the truth, of course. My name is Samuel. I'm from the Center for African and Asian Studies at Addis Ababa University and also advisor to the Minister of Peace. As someone who closely follow up the events unfolding in Ethiopia currently, I think you would agree with me that the international media has been picking up bite-sized information and making very shallow analysis of the context, even when given the opportunity to report at the spot. My question to you both is, how influential is the international media's misinforming appeal to the international community, but particularly the West, on Ethiopia? What should we expect? Thank you.
Okay, behind you, Dr. Samuel. Okay, I didn't know it was you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is to Jeff. First of all, I really thank you, both of you, for standing for truth at this difficult time. My question is, you know, as someone who wrote Ethiopian history in 1930s and 40s, do you see any similarities between the current coordinated attack and the pressure on Ethiopia and the pressure Ethiopia faced at the start of the Second World War in 1936? We remember how the Ethiopia and its emperor Haile Selassie was ridiculed, demonized, and attacked, and our appeal was rejected by the then League of Nations. So do you see any similarities? Thank you.
Second, okay, third next to you, and then Professor Jacob and Professor Kasaun.
My name is Abraham. Thank you very much for the opportunity. First of all, I have actually a question to Ars TV. First of all, thank you so much for this event. But I don't believe the title of the event fits into the current situation of Ethiopia. Fairness and balance, the 2 nouns, and international media coverage of Ethiopia. We don't see any fairness and balance, so I think it should be corrected as fairness and balance and media coverage of Ethiopia. So that way we can understand there is social media and things like that, so we can have some sort of understanding. But international media and fairness and balance doesn't really come together for me. My question is, Jeff, thank you so much for being here, and we communicated on different issues, different times. Are we really to believe what comes out of the international media after this time, after betraying Ethiopia now and again? Because these days what we see is, if one media seems to report or give a report on an issue happening in Ethiopia, and if we think that is somehow balanced, we're celebrating it. We are somehow celebrating it. That is a tendency, because last time Stephen Sacker of BBC interviewed Getachew from the TPLF clique, and the social media happened to celebrate most of the things, most of the questions, because that guy did his job somehow properly. So are we really to believe after this time what comes out of the international media? Because I'm saying this because I lost faith and I try to recover it, but I don't anymore. I don't have that tendency or that actually belief in the international media. So our inclination, I believe, should be towards the social media, and that front should be our area to fight. And the second question I have is to Professor Anne. Thank you again for coming to Ethiopia and participating in such an event. But from your talks, I believe you seem to depend on research and analysis in regards to what is happening in the West, or in correlation to what is happening in the international community everywhere in the world. Do you really think that what is happening in the international community everywhere in the world, especially in the West, applies to Ethiopia? Because we're being attacked, unfairly being attacked, and if we are to apply the real theory of, I don't know, knowledge or research, we're not going to overcome the problem that we're facing. So do you still believe that media and research could answer the questions that we have towards the problems that Ethiopia is facing today? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Professor Jacobs Zagan.
Thank you very much, Rani. I'm very much delighted with this high-level panel. So I think rightly framed as fairness panel. It is a great event. I thank both panelists, and I read the recent commentary by Professor Anne Gerald, and I also read Jeff's Prevail book of 1936-41. I'm really fascinated when you said that Ethiopia prevailed during the Italian aggression of 1936-41, amidst a lot of killings, like 800,000 Ethiopians got killed, like tons and tons of poison gas pouring down over Ethiopia, not only on the soldiers, but also on the peasants. So that was a fascinating story to remember. And I really appreciated when you said you don't want to speculate what would happen in the future in the current problem in Ethiopia. But you said, and you hoped Ethiopia will prevail. I think that's a great statement. Now, my question is that why is it that the Western media is very much bogged down on regime change, all over the world? And why is the Western media is against democracy, actually? I know this is not maybe a good question, but there are evidences, starting from, for example, the Iranian election, which brought up Mohammad Mossadegh, and that government was torn down. And we know what happened in Congo against Patrice Lumumba, who was duly elected. And we know also Fidel Castro was the voice of the people of Cuba against the dictatorship of Batista. And the media was against Castro and in favor of the previous dictator. And we also know that when Iraq was attacked left and right, it was not only Saddam Hussein, but Iraqi civilization of thousands of years was attacked. And no journalist was really deeply reporting on that one. The Syrian case is the same. Every government in the West was against Assad, I know. But I think what is being destroyed in Syria is the civilization, not one person, not one group. But what happened in Ethiopia in terms of the media handling is quite a parallel to all those. And then Ethiopia has chosen a course of political life. But that was not accepted by Western governments. It's quite clear. But I'm wondering why the media is so fascinated and is so busy in order to make, new regimes against elected and democratic regimes. So if any reflections on this, it's really mind-boggling. But this does not actually prevent Ethiopia from prevailing. Thank you for that thought and for that scenario. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Professor Kassan, ante ጨምርና 5, we will do 5 questions, and it's okay, right? 5? Okay. 5 will be fine? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking members of the panel for coming at this point in time. I am also gratified that your assessment of state of affairs in Ethiopia are so clear as I am, and the rest of my compatriots across the board. Daniel, I don't have questions, but I have some comments to make. As stated, Ethio-Western relations, particularly the Ethio-United States relations, have spanned over more than 100 years. Most of the time this has been cordial, but my reading is that the United States was not around when the stakes were high. It has repeated it for the 10th or the 15th time in its behaviors that it has displayed associated with the recent conflict. This prompts me to go through the track record of, in particular, administrations spearheaded by the Democratic Party. Ethiopia was abandoned by the United States when the fascists invaded the country. This was expressed in some kind of conspiracy of silence. Roosevelt, regardless of his stature, commendable stature, has opted to be silent in the face of brutal aggression against a poor, remote country. This was repeated, among others, during the reign of the administration of Carter in 1977, and we all know what happened. Again, repeated by Obama, who condoned an authoritarian dispensation, particularly during his visit when the country was in full turmoil, that he endorsed the incumbency of the authoritarian regime that was in place at that point in time. Obama, too, in the form of Biden, incarnated as Biden. Again, we know what it's doing. Now, as a student of international relations, I am fairly exposed to the workings of the political economy of the West in general, and the United States in particular. So the dispositions that we are currently experiencing is driven by personal and institutional vested interests in the Washington establishment, the workings of monopoly finance capital, and the military-industrial complex. So I am fairly familiar with that. We thought that those who preside over the pinnacles of power have smoothened their postures and gestures, but unfortunately this did not happen. Mistakenly, I was one of those who believed that the foremost exponents of the neocon strategy and approach have been entrenched in the Republican Party. I now realize that I was terribly mistaken. The worst party is also in the Democratic Party, in the United States Democratic Party. Now, the people of Tigray. The people of Tigray, as you said, are our compatriots. Tigray is the genesis of our statehood and history and civilization. So I don't think that the Washington establishment is closer to the people of Tigray than we are. Whatever happens, unbecomingly to the people of Tigray is painful to us first and foremost. Finally, I would corroborate your scenario and make an objective prediction that Ethiopia will prevail, whatever the cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to start, Jeff?
Well, can I?
Because you are not taking notes.
Well, can I just, sorry, because can I just take issue with something that you said just respectfully, because it's my nature to quibble over the historical details, but Roosevelt did not abandon Ethiopia. Roosevelt at the time, that distinguished gentleman who bought my book, can loan you the copy, Roosevelt was dealing with an isolationist Congress at the time. He couldn't help Ethiopia. You could make the case that the federal State Department, which reported to him, which was doing its own thing, was actually denying African Americans passports, which would have allowed them to go over to fight for Ethiopia. There were only 2 black residents in the United States who ever got to fight for Ethiopia. One was John Robinson. The other was Hubert Julian, who was a con man who frankly got his butt kicked out twice, and as you probably know, crashed his plane during the coronation ceremonies right into our eucalyptus tree. But it would be incorrect to say that Roosevelt abandoned Ethiopia. In actual fact, there was a plan underway with Anthony Eden to help Ethiopia. The real villain of the story is Neville Chamberlain, who scotched it and said, oh no, we're making plans of our own, we're dealing with Italy, and a wonderful opportunity was lost, which could have saved Ethiopia at the last minute in 1935, in terms of 1935-36. Chamberlain and 37, Chamberlain was the real villain of the piece, who just went, nope, don't want your help, and slammed the door in the Americans' faces. And Anthony Eden, who doesn't get enough credit, was scrambling like mad to get the Americans to come in with a plan. So it's a little more, with respect, it's a little more nuanced with that. I can't speak to the Carter administration because I was probably about 10 years old. I'll leave that to the academic to respond to in terms of American relations through the following decades in terms of how they're treating Ethiopia. But just on this point, I just had to clarify that.
Sorry.
Okay, really good questions. Let me start with the relationship between, or the significance of the media messages and the significance in terms of having impact. I think it's very significant, and I think the media messages have and will continue to have impact. I would encourage people to think about analysis more generally, because media is one civil society organization, right? There's NGOs, there's think tanks, there's academicians, and we've seen all participate in analysis. And we've seen this blurred distinction in some ways between those who are really racing for the analysis. And I would put myself in that pot as well. And so this speed of production is what we've seen with this experience. But media gets the platform. So whoever is commenting, whatever reports are being referred to in the media, that's what the public, the global public, is hearing about. And if you do research, and again, I'm committed to the data and the research, there is an alignment, a concerning alignment between TPLF propaganda and international policy statements and words that are being used, words that are very strong and that were used very early in a lot of this commentary. And don't forget, once you take positions, it's very difficult for you to pare back from those positions. And I think we saw that as well. If you think about those positions as a stool with 3 legs, for some of those media organizations to be condemning certain crimes and crimes against humanity, use of children, and it would almost snap a leg off the stool and the platform that media corporation had set for themselves. I can give you a few snippets from my own experience. I have had lots of opinion pieces refused by the major newspapers. Now, I've never had a problem in the past having opinion pieces accepted. And when one major newspaper wrote back to me and said, "Thank you, Anne, but we're just not comfortable publishing your piece," which I thought was very balanced, because of the report that was issued by a certain NGO that same week. And I said, "Thank you very much for your email. I have to tell you that this is the first time in my academic career that I have had an opinion piece refused on the basis that it did not align with the view of the newspaper." And so we're seeing a little bit of a different error that way as well, because it's the role of civil society to represent all voices, all diverse voices, as long as those voices are credible and an evidence base is respected. So I think it's very significant. The other thing that we're seeing is when a country decides on the status of a certain group, and that status is non-state actor, non-state armed group, terrorist group in this case, media corporations giving them platforms. And nobody's talked about this yet. No. But when Stephen Sacker tweeted out the other day, I was very tempted to say, "Stephen, we'll look forward to seeing the head of the Tamada on your program in the future, and we'll look forward to seeing the Russian militias working in the Donbass area, fighting the Ukraine armed forces, and the Philippine non-state armed groups, etc." So we're seeing new ground being broken on that front as well, where external actors are deciding the status of groups in your country. The question at the back on knowledge and am I confident that research will get us there? Well, I would say yes. I would really defend good research and good research cultures, but research requires discipline, right? And I've worked in this country now for 19 years, back when I was doing my PhD, and I've lived here on occasion as well. And I realized very early on in my tenure that an investment had to be made in the country to really gain a sense of the uniqueness and enormity and historical experience. And I still didn't feel confident even after probably 8 to 9 years being here. I had to really invest time in the regions and the regional states and spend time with groups. And so I think there's a distinction between information and knowledge, and there's an important transition. And so if a disciplinary approach that is interdisciplinary in nature, because a lot of these critical challenges to humanity require an interdisciplinary lens. And I'm a political scientist, so I come with one lens. I have to talk to the scientists, I have to talk to the anthropologists, I have to talk to the practitioners, and that's robustness of methodology. The challenge is that in times like this, it takes a long time to do all of that. Wow. So you have to have had an investment in the country to have all those outlets to go to. So I would say, yes, I believe in it, but challenges remain. The Western media, why are they against democracy and why are they for regime change, etc.? I mean, I can understand why there's that interpretation. I think if I can be academic for a moment, it comes down to the distinction between state-building approaches and nation-building approaches, and there's been lots of tension between those two things for years, where nation-building is all about the development of a society and not people locked within hard borders and formal institutions, the latter of which is all about state-building. And we tend to go in as an interventionist force with that mindset. Build institutions, the hardware, not the software. And in some of my writing, you may have seen, I've been very critical about the tools in the international community at the moment for peace and security, sustainable peace and security. And I've said they are either skewed to one side of a continuum, or not a continuum, a divide, or another side. We have on one hand diplomatic expressions of support, condemnation, concern, And we've seen lots of all of that, right, over the last 10 months. And on the other hand, we have harsh measures like intervention, sanctions, etc. And there's nothing in the middle. There's nothing. I worked for the African Union High Implementation Panel during the times when there was facilitated discussions and mediation between Sudan and South Sudan. And we had to take out a begging bowl every time we needed to meet with the parties, because mediation just wasn't a big issue that was funded and not thought to be a big issue. And I give you one example, but there's many things that we can do now in that middle space which prioritizes nation building and the importance of society instead of the state. I think your comment on the Washington establishment is excellent, and you know, I think there's lots of unsavory and less tasteful things that go on that concern lobby groups, that concern the funding of midterm election campaigns, and those constituencies have really, really applied pressure in different directions, and pressure in the way of people trying to commentate on it, and pressure in terms of fueling a narrative in different directions. And I think what we've learned from this is that insurgency requires counterinsurgency, and information plays a big role in counterinsurgency.
Thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on some points that Anne made, because notice it's very interesting. Here's a respected academic who can't get an article placed in a high-profile newspaper. And this is very interesting. Without that kind of forum, the information gets shut out. I had the prostitute, as I called him, bait me on Twitter and say, well, you're not published by respect. I've been published here, and I've been published here, I've been published. Big freaking deal. I've got like 18 books under my belt. There is in the American journalistic tradition two icons, which are unfortunately young people don't learn about them anymore. One is George Seldes, a guy who reported on the Russian Revolution, a guy who interviewed Mussolini himself, and I.F. Stone. Seldes got so ticked off with the American journalistic establishment that he created his own newsletter. It was subscription only, and he put out stories which the Western media were not doing. I.F. Stone did the same thing in the 50s. So the reason why my pieces are on Medium is I don't have to wait around for an editor to say, should we print this? And meanwhile, the story goes stale. I don't have to answer to someone who says, well, sorry, but we can't run with that in the same way that Professor Fitzgerald got rejected. So the forum is very important in terms of things. A gentleman in the crowd asked me if I see parallels between 1930s and 40s Ethiopia and now. Well, having studied the subject, I can't help but see that because, again, as I said earlier, Ethiopia went to the League of Nations in good faith and said, hey, look, wall, look, they attacked us 60 miles within our border, come on. And of course, it's betrayal. And you're getting betrayed all over again in terms of this. So yes, naturally I see a parallel. There was a gentleman who spoke in terms of like trusting the Western media versus social media, and we've talked about Stephen Sacker. Let's not forget that Stephen Sacker interviewed Dr. Gedeon, your Attorney General, and this is what they do. He threw out questions which, one, were not really appropriate for the Attorney General to comment on. He just had a government spokesman that he wanted to hit with this stuff. And so, of course, months later, everybody applauds when he gives the same treatment to Getachew Reda. But the point is that's how the media plays the game. It says, well, we were harsh to both. No, you didn't do your damn homework. And I saw what you did in the first one, so I'm not terribly impressed by what you did to the second one. We have to hold them accountable in terms of these things. So whether you take the social media, I found the social media useful up to a point in terms of obtaining information, but again, you have to verify the facts. There are some things which is very frustrating for me because I know that even before the Tigray War started, when we had incidents of Amhara being targeted for ethnic cleansing episodes, I would say, can you give me a proper source? Can we authenticate the numbers? Blah, blah, blah. And it's the nature of the forum that people went, and there were some community groups that did it. But we have to deal in facts. We have to deal in the evidence, which is true of research just as it is in journalism. And ultimately, we're talking about accountability. The other thing, too, is the closed circle in terms of Washington. You are dealing with Alex DeWalt. Alex DeWalt is a liar. Alex DeWalt lied in his research, lied by omission. I can point you out the page in the book where he talks about the famine, and yet he seems to noticeably leave out the fact that the reportage by Martin Plott, by others, that said, yeah, the TPLF handed over sacks of sand, which was meant to be food, while they took money. Funny how that didn't get into the details. This man has access to the people who are the architects of policy in Washington. At the same time, he can do a requiem memorial for one of his pals within the TPLF organization, which you're aware of, on BBC and write these hagiographic pieces. So look at how the wheel turns. Policy, back to media, back to the public, back to policy, and it's a closed circle. And they accuse us of being conspiracy theorists, and look at what we're dealing with. Look at who they talk to. We haven't mentioned this, I don't think, have we? They go and scurry off to talk to Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. These are guys who tweet out about your country, and meanwhile they use photos of Somalia and Iraq, and they can't even get that straight in their tweets. They go and phone up victims at a refugee camp without actually going to the scene, which is what they originally did. They don't verify who the hell they're talking to. And what does the media do? It gives Amnesty International a platform. So we circle back to who has the access, who has the forum, who are they talking to? You could probably fit all of their experts into this one room. Count how many times they're interviewed again and again and again and again and again and again. And they're not talking to you, or very rarely. You have the Ambassador Henneck, who did a fantastic job in one, I believe it was a Deutsche Welle program. I don't remember exactly.
France 24.
Yeah, sorry,
France 24.
France 24, I beg your pardon. Did an excellent job there. We have Asfa Wosanasarate, who was on. Aside from those two, I can't think of an occasion where the Ethiopian position was eloquently articulated and given a chance to be put forward. And that's what we're dealing with. So it's very interesting. These are very important points that we're making in terms of forum and access, in terms of the story narrative.
Here's what got me interested. First of all, thank you for Anne Fitzgerald and for your sober reflections on what's going on in the media, and Jeff as well for your passionate views, which we Ethiopian victim of the coordinated campaign sometimes miss. So here's my what got me interested when Anne talked about rejection from a media to publish her views, her opinions, and Jeff as well talked about a little bit about that. And we have also encountered in Ethiopia, different analysts and academicians trying to put their perspective on international media, and they have been refused several times. So this has been a phenomena that we have observed for the last 7 months. So I would like it if you both kind of discuss a little bit about the ownership of the media as well. Doesn't that have an impact on what stories get to be published and broadcasted? Like some of the medias are state-owned, like the BBC, like the CNN, and some others that are very affiliated, like the France 24. Even France 24 gave Ambassador Henok a platform with 3 anti-Ethiopian with so-called analysts, very popular with their anti-Ethiopian analysis. So, what's your perspective? What's your take on the ownership of the media and the interest that is driving the narrative that they want to go mainstream? And as well, thank you, Anne, for mentioning that many medias, international media, are quite frankly disrespecting the House of People's representative, forced us even to issue a statement that they should not use some namings that would legitimize a terrorist group as a sane state actor. So thank you for mentioning that. It should be discussed as well. Why is it the international media still refusing to act accordingly? The Ethiopian state, the parliament passed on labeling TPLF as a terrorist group, but still giving a platform and naming them as some, regionally legitimate. Sometimes even some medias give them, like President Debretsion, as still the president of the Tigray regional state. So why is it? Doesn't the ownership of the medias have a role in that? What's your take on that? So can you say a little bit about that?
Before, do you mind if I take that first? Simply because Anne will give a better answer afterwards. The simple, stark answer is you're black. No, seriously.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, look at how your history is written about. For years, it was written about the Italian conquest of Ethiopia. Yet we call it the French occupation. So half of France wasn't conquered during the Second World War, but we call it the French occupation. But it's a conquest in terms of Ethiopia, which wasn't even true because they occupied half the country, and you could have sniper patriots busy shooting down right from the mountains that you would see from Addis locations. I cannot intelligently fully discuss the ownership of media per se. I think, to be honest with you, my experience, and I've worked for some major companies, not long because I inevitably get my ass shown to the door because I cause trouble, but there is a journalistic culture which sort of reinforces itself over and over again. I will tell this story. I've told this story several times. I will tell it again. In case you haven't heard it. I was in a newsroom of a major organization. I tried to write a story about Sierra Leone, which at the time was being presented as a tribal conflict, when in fact it was about conflict diamonds. I wrote the story, and the video editor screwed up the order of the shots, so the story didn't make much sense. And the producer pulled me aside and said, "What the hell was that?" And I said, "I was trying to explain what this is really about." And he said to me words which have stuck with me ever since and which have guided my attitudes towards this. He said, "I don't care why the Africans are fighting. Just show the Africans fighting." That tells you a lot about how they think. And that has nothing to do with the ownership of the company. That has to do with the journalistic culture. Anne mentioned Myanmar before. I had to fight years ago to get Myanmar stories onto the news operation that I was working with, because to them, it's over there. What difference does it make? In the same way that you look in terms of, the moral, Tibor Nagy, if I'm pronouncing his name properly, pointed out early on, why are you doing a moral equivalency between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government? Because they can. They wouldn't dare do this with Al-Qaeda or ISIS. I've compared the attack in terms of early November to the equivalent of Ethiopia's 9/11 to try to drive home the lesson to them, to say, look at what the hell you're doing. Look at how you're talking to people. Look at who you're giving a platform to. And I come back to, Anne probably has a much better answer for this, but I come back to the fact that it's sheer bloody racism. It is a wonderful, entertaining narrative for them to portray Africans as at war with each other or in constant conflict. If you go to an American city, walk into a Barnes & Noble or an Indigo if you were in Canada, and see how many books are on Africa which are just about your culture or about your history without colonialism. Famine, war, disease, AIDS, so forth, drives me nuts. So the next book that I'm coming out with is actually self-plug here, is called The Gifts of Africa, which is about the intellectual legacy of Africa. And it'll probably stand there all by itself with all the other books, which are famine, war, disease, so forth. This is what they do. This is the narrative that they have set up for you. And they want to stick to that. And I really believe that there is a racist element behind it. I'm sure Anne has a more nuanced, insightful view, but mine is rather dark. But I already brought this forum to a negative end. That's why I'm deferring to you to give the better answer afterwards.
No, I think Jeff's right, absolutely right. This is a dark hour for U.S. foreign policy and the international community to a certain extent. I want to address, your points are excellent, especially with regard to ownership of the media. Media needs to be independent. Media is an active civil society organization. Civil society organizations represent the population, right? Individual population members cannot represent themselves at all times vocally to the higher levels, and that's why we have interlocutors. Media, NGOs, local organizations, religious organizations, etc., and that makes up civil society, of which the media is an important actor. And I think we all have to recognize that as individuals we have unconscious biases, and we always have to check against them. I'm no exception to that. You're no exception to that.
Oh, yeah.
And that has implications for accountability as well. So media organizations have boards. That's one level of accountability, but we need more than that now with the digitalization of media and the pace at which digitalized media and analysis has outstripped the pace of policy development on digital governance. And that means that nations themselves need to be innovative in developing accountability mechanisms so that they can offer their populations another way of being more judicious in terms of what media to consume. And I also think, it's a bit of an elephant in the room, but I'm going to broach it. It is the issue of when a party is in place that represents one group in a society for 27 years, there is a privileged social structure that develops as well. And that social structure transplants itself into the international community. And to the defense of the international community and some media outlets, that is a complex element of Ethiopian society that has been very poorly understood. So many authorities across the international community will think that perhaps they are getting diverse views, but because of their lack of knowledge on Ethiopia as a whole, they're not, for these and other reasons. Yes, your second point, or part and parcel of your first point, was about the view of the Parliament's decision, the House of People's Representative decision on the status of a particular group in this country and why that wasn't being recognized. I think what we've also seen with the policy decisions on Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa is that there has been selectivity applied to the legitimacy of governments and selectivity that's been applied to humanity. And that's why I raised the issue of the Lord's Resistance Army and the way in which the international community swept into Uganda, well, the US did, to support the Ugandan Defense Forces hunt for Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army, because it was an issue of humanity. And it had been socialized, or although it wasn't communicated at that time, it was a Black Lives Matter issue. And for the silence to sustain on that issue in the Ethiopian context was shocking and worrying. For individuals like Ambassador Godek in some of those congressional hearings to say quite specifically that the view of the Ethiopian parliament on the particular group is not a view the US shares. My reaction to that was, who is another country to counter a decision that was taken by a democratic parliament? So I think we're seeing selectivity, and I think we're seeing hypocrisy as well. And the hypocrisy, for instance, there's a lot of talk about China at the moment, and Western countries are speaking out about the way that China violates the rules-based order and international norms. But that's happening in other camps as well. We're still working with China because there's lots of good reasons to do so. But we're not seeing that bad behavior that's being called out by some mirrored by those same actors. And I think lastly is the issue of Black Lives Matter, and some of you will know that I wrote about this in the context of Ethiopia, but I think the point is that there's a blurred distinction between domestic policy and foreign policy when it concerns security, human security. And that if Black Lives Matter, it does not just come down to the thought leaders of African American cousins of the Africans here. It means everyone in the world. Black Lives Matter for the world. And if we're committing ourselves to a social justice platform like that, it's got to be a global social justice platform. So, thank you.
Okay, yeah, yes, thank you very much. So if we'll take another 3 questions, possibly from this side. By the way, before we go to taking questions, because one of the questions were directed to Arts TV from a gentleman over there. So we are at this Arts TV is all about availing the platform. We don't form opinion. If we form opinion and come here, then it would not be an intellectual discussion. We might probably easily have said or changed the title to unfairness and lack of balance in the international media about Ethiopia. If we said that we already have formed our opinion, that means we don't do that. We provide the platform, you decide. So I hope that explains it. Now, we purposely did that because that's the principle of our establishment. That being the case, I'll take 3 questions. Oh, Mohammed, by the way, Jonathan, Mr. Jonathan, he's always modest, not to introduce himself. He is head of the Ethiopian Broadcasting Agency and deputy media authority. Sorry, Jonathan, I'm an old man. So the media authority deputy director. Mohammed is the, you probably would have introduced yourself, but you are modest, I know, Mohammed too. He is deputy director of the diaspora agency. So I'll give one to Mohammed and another to, okay, the 2 gentlemen over there.
Take 5.
Okay, 3. And 2 from this side if it is possible. If not, doesn't matter. Yes, sir, 4. And 5th one. Yes, sir. Okay, 5.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank you, and I'm glad to have you here, to see you here, and I really thank you for your positive contribution in shaping the discourses in the media, especially in the social media, and thank you for the wonderful job you did, Jeff, in the MICA case. I just have one question for both of you, maybe in different perspective. The first one is for Professor Ann. When it comes to fairness and balance, just we came to know that we were expecting the unexpected from the medias, but we don't want to lose hope from the academics and the researchers. What is your assessment, I mean, when it comes to the conflict studies and about the role of the academics, the researchers. I mean, are they, moving forward? Are they building their own arguments based on facts, based on evidences, with rigorous methodology, or they are just following, those events dramatized on the medias? Are we really having, a genuine evaluation of the academics about the situation happening here? And also maybe your message for the academicians and the researchers at this important event. And the same questions for the media. When it comes, at the initial stage, we were blaming ourselves for not availing informations, evidences, for not activating our institutions in providing information for the media or for the public. But later on, all our efforts, just as you mentioned, for example, our ambassadors, our diplomats were denying access for the medias, for the headlines, for the front pages on the magazines. So now, really, as every society has its own political culture, so is a media culture. In Ethiopia, we do have, a long-standing, culture of using the Western media as the primary source of information when it comes to global politics. How do you see the prospect of the credibility of the Western medias from now on, when they are, covering, when they are, disinforming the public, those facts happening in our eyes? We are not angry by their coverage, what is happening in Tigray. Tigray is our part. The humanitarian crisis, all the coverage about what is happening there, we are not angry with that. Rather, we were confused why we were not flooded by AIDS as it has been covered, as it has been represented. But why the fairness, when it comes to fairness and balance? Don't you see that a total loss of trust, credibility of international and Western media to become a primary source when referring to global politics? What's your observation on that? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with some first reactions to that. I can't speak on behalf of other academics, and I wouldn't like to do that, particularly on an individual basis. I think what we are seeing in the academic community is some polarization, and what I would say is that we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be. We should be seeing a consideration of all the facts, and some not polarized views. I think you can have different views and different perspectives, but the polarization has remained. In fact, the gulf has widened. People get their information from different sources, right? I still am, but when we go through vilification campaigns, and we've been smeared quite badly, these emails get sent to all sorts of organizations and media organizations, international communities, presidents, prime ministers, national delegations. I can give you an email where there's 450 contact names on, and I am copied on it for intimidation purposes. And lots of unfortunate things are said about me, and then it's received. Now, on a couple of occasions, I was kept on the database, and I saw the narratives that were going out regularly. This was not even a weekly feed, sometimes every 3 days. And because I was kept on the distribution list, I could see the information going out. And some people would have believed that information and those facts to be true. But they were fabrications, in most, if not all, cases. But this is the power of digital intimidation and the power of a propaganda effort. And I think that there's a lack of readiness to accept that that exists. not just in the academic community, but also in the Western media community, in the NGO think tank community. So when you see organizations like Chatham House in the UK and the equivalents in Washington and Ottawa and Brussels giving platforms to certain people, those who cry out about it and say this is not fair, there's a lack of knowledge on the part of the host organization in terms of what's fair and what's not, because the context is very complex and it's unknown. So I would say that we shouldn't be seeing such polarization, and in fact we're starting to see some merging in some area. Some journalists who have gone firm with very strong positions are starting to speak in perhaps a more balanced way, I think, over the last 1 or 2 weeks. People being denied in Western media, yes, I think it's safe to say, particularly in this part of the world, but also for academics and analysts who have depended on certain sources. We all have sources on our electronic devices that we look at every morning. And certainly from an individual perspective, I've applied great scrutiny to that now, and some have been deleted, other ones have been added. So I think that some media organizations have suffered irreparable damage because of this experience. And something I'd just like to add is that my father always told me that human rights are a privilege, not to be abused. And human rights and the practice and exercise of human rights, like the freedom of expression, needs to be treated as a privilege and protected and nurtured. And we've seen a lot of bravado and some bad behavior and some bravadish attitudes coming across that don't say a lot for treatment of humanity. So I think, you know, in terms of things like security sector reform, democratic reform, we might have to see some media reform going forward.
Good.
I'm not an academic, but the thing is I have a different take on this because I'm trying to get my master's, so I'm studying some conflict studies. And the weird thing is that we have to make a distinction between what Anne and others do, which is proper research methodology, and what is passing itself off as scholarship. For instance, there's a guy who is at the University of Ghent who had a running tally of victims in terms of the Tigray genocide. Well, if you go to his research methodology page, I think on the very first page, the guy says, "We phoned our friends." Really? This is an acceptable form of research methodology? It's ridiculous. And there's also papers which are put out on various websites by what I call the conflict merchants, which are passing themselves off as research, which are nothing more than polemics. This has been, unfortunately, a problem with Ethiopian studies for quite a while. In terms of trying to research your history, I came across stuff which was just remarkable, where you had open signs of biases. For instance, a fellow called, there's a great anecdote, Wilfred Thesiger, the explorer, who was a friend to the imperial family, went to a British diplomat and said, "Who introduced Marxism to Ethiopia? Where did it come from? Did it come from the Chinese agents or Russians?" And the diplomat, without missing a beat, said there was no need. It was started by the Americans and British academics who taught in the country. And what you do is you go back, and anything prior to 1960, you're on fairly okay ground. You've got Richard Pankhurst doing a fantastic, just monumental bibliography of stuff we'll be using as material for ages. And then you get the polemicists. You have people like Baxter, who ends a journal, an academic journal article with the motto of the OLF. And you're going, how the hell did this pass peer review? You have a book called The Invention of Ethiopia by Holcomb, and I forget, unfortunately, the name of the co-author, which posits the theory that there never was an Ethiopian state. It was always an invention, and that it was the proxy of England and France against Italy, and even the Battle of Adwa was some kind of indirect war. And you read this and you go, this is ridiculous. And there was even a peer review in a journal which said, really short on evidence. And yet this book got out. Now this book sat gathering dust on the shelf in the 70s. I had to go search through our own public library, reference library, to find this thing. Lo and behold, it emerges as a text which all the TPLF trolls on one side of this argument are now citing now. And it's a polemic. It has very little evidence. It has next to nothing in terms of substance, but they needed research propaganda to put with it. This is what's passing for scholarship. One of the most inflammatory examples I can give you is I like the city of Harare. I enjoyed my time there. I would love to go back there. The Harare Council of Ontario took issue with me on Twitter and said, blah, 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 blah. And I went, oh, how convenient of you to attach the PDF for which you're claiming that refutes my claims. And I looked through and it said, the government of Harar has always been, has been lauded by the League of Nations as the most democratic, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at the source and I went, this is really familiar. And I went through their citation. And the thing is, what's fascinating is the gentleman who has a copy of Prevail can bear this out if he goes home and looks through his copy, is they were citing a fascist propaganda document which was submitted to the League of Nations during the time of 1934, getting down, 35, getting down to the time, the countdown towards the war. So here you had an organization literally using a fascist document by the people. And remember, they bombed Harar. They bombed and wiped out one of the oldest mosques in the country. And all I could think of is, imagine what your grandfathers would make of you using the document of your oppressors to justify your position. Just unbelievable. So there are problems in terms of Ethiopian studies where American and British scholars and others have poisoned the well. And because this stuff is in print and we treat it with deference and we assume everything is equal in terms of the amount of dedication and scholarship into it, we don't question that. There's a big difference between what Professor Fitzgerald does and others do and this nonsense. In terms of the media, well, we're taught that media are supposed to be objective. There is no objectivity. There's always, as you said, there's always the unconscious biases. I have them, you have them, everybody has them. What you can do is you can say, let's give some time to this position. However, as Nitsanet Laku and I were discussing this the other day, he said, that does not mean opening your door and giving a forum to a terrorist organization and giving them a platform to spread propaganda and lies. If you're going to do that, you better damn well have a checklist in terms of things that you're supposed to factually check off. The media in the West has evolved over time. They always dealt with their own audience. What we need to see is the rise of African media empires of their own or media networks of their own, which can challenge the narrative and have the power. And we're living in a digital world where everybody can now hopefully get access to those channels and say, okay, I've got somewhere else where I can go get the proper information from. In terms of irreparable damage, that's a toughie. It's the BBC. They'll bounce back from this and they'll just merrily go along. Others, I'm not so sure. They might have permanent damage, but I'm a cynical bastard, so I tend to think that they'll just merrily go along. Because in the end, they don't really care about you. They care about having the narrative for the evening. Look at what's happening now in terms of Afghanistan. And within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, Afghanistan will be off the headlines and they'll move on to something else. This is what they do.
Okay. Thank
Why
you.
don't you take all of the rest?
Yeah, okay, let me take, we already have, okay, 2 from here, yes sir, and 1 from there, 3 questions, okay, so we'll start from there. 3 more questions because...
It's my fault I took up the time.
No, don't worry, man, I mean, we enjoyed it a lot, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the last 9 months, something I learned is that we live in an alternate world. And in all this, the victim has been the truth. And I would really like to appreciate both of you for standing with the truth, for standing with the minority, which truth is part of. And thank you for this opportunity now to listen to you. And also thank you for what you said about the African mentality from the West. We know the disrespect is very obvious. From the famous Donald Trump speech of shithole countries. I love Donald Trump because he speaks the truth. He doesn't act. But there are others who are quite poisonous, who kill us and who are trying to kill us now. One thing, a couple of things I want to ask. Is it normal for any country to have the audacity, or any countries, international or otherwise, to ask another country for unfettered access, to open your borders as they wish, when they wish? Is it normal for NGOs or countries to just say, okay, we want to fly into any part of your country and you have no right, you have no say? I mean, is it really? I've never heard of that before. Maybe I'm just like waking up to reality now. And also, one thing that has not been mentioned is the price fake news, lies, the results, where countries die, hundreds of millions are displaced and die. Okay, we all agree, especially in the last 1 year for me. I refer to BBC. I just run to CNN for any reliable news, but I know I've been fooling myself now. Is it normal? Okay, we know what do you call it? Ethics is gone. We don't talk about ethics here. But is there any legal grounds to hold people such as Keitel Trumbull, William Davidson, Martin Platt, people who are actually doing much more than pulling triggers to kill Ethiopians, whether they're Oromo, Amhara, Tigray, or any part of Ethiopians? Is there any legality on world stage to hold these people to account, to stop doing what they do in something that has nothing to do with them, in something that's none of their business? I know they make a business.
Okay, could you summarize the question, please, sir? Yeah, because we're running out of time.
Is there any legal grounds to hold these people to account for the damage they are causing all over?
Okay, thank you. And we'll take a bunch of questions and then we'll wrap up because we are running out of time. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Zalek Agassas. I'm a musician, lived in Chicago for many years. Maybe Jeff could answer this. The media houses operate in their own format, and they operate, of course, now because of digitization, most of the old brick-and-mortar newspapers, and they're going out of business. The ones that exist are being bought up by the Jeff Bezos and the big corporations who have tied to the military-industrial complexes and the whole deep state. So to challenge this situation we're in now, don't you think Ethiopia needs to acquire a global PR firm or a crisis management company? They might be tied up to this situation in the whole format, but if the diplomats cannot challenge the issues that are arising in the international media, don't you think we need a firm? Or to give you an example, this company I've been approaching have a lot of offices in Africa, and they're headquartered in Johannesburg. As you know, last month there was a big crisis in South Africa, the riots and everything, and it was silenced just within 10 days' time. We don't hear about it anymore. That's the kind of work these firms do. Just to pass this crossroad, don't you think we need that kind of form? My second question is about the historical background, as you have written about the Second World War, where the African Americans and the Jamaicans and Caribbean people have volunteered to come and fight for Ethiopia at that time, which they still exist. That's when Professor Ann mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement, which I've sent them a couple of articles in the Founders.
So, Zalika, could you please wrap up the question? Yes, sir.
Don't you think we need some kind of global organization to assist us in bringing up these things? You know, I wrote as a citizen to these organizations, but they need a push to get it into the bigger media houses and so. My question is, don't you think we need...
I think the question, thank you, but final question over there. There was somebody, and I think we're running out of time, and we are again a schedule, you know, like we have to go to lunch because the hotel, we told them that we'd finish at 12:30, but it's already 1 o'clock. Yeah. And in an event that I lead, never happens, but sometimes, you know. So the last question over there.
He's there now.
Oh, he came here? Okay. If you could make it just 1 minute, sir, please.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Gasha Abdullah Tahir. Our organization name is Greenland Foundation. We plan 3 for Peace. So I really acknowledge both of you for making a commitment to educate us. Really makes a huge difference. So. The Ethiopian American in US, our organization, we have an organization and we hire a PR firm, and we have over 200,000 signatures. Is it the right approach? What do you think about that? What's working, what's not working, or what's missing? So that's what I want, and I really appreciate for the opportunity you give us.
You got it? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I think we have already taken all the questions. So
there was one more at the back.
I know, but okay, if you can make it very short. Yeah, I wish it's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Mine is brief and short. We have been discussing about the media coverage, but we have been discussing the Western media coverage. But what I see is there is a competition for narratives, you know, both from the Western media as well as from media that is like RT, CGTN, the Anadolu Agency and so on, from Turkey, China, and Russia, also trying to compete for media space. So the global audience and ordinary citizens need a representation and a fair transmission of the information. We are not seeing that. It's a competition for narratives, and all is lying within a propaganda campaign on different sides. And that leads me to my question. Isn't the international community or world power arrangement more polarized than it was 50 years back? Because the kind of global power arrangements after the fall of the Soviet Union had dominated, you know, the world power arrangements, but now we are seeing a much more multipolar power arrangement, and we kind of see a reflection of that in the Horn of Africa. So how do you see competing media narratives and the international power balance going forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll answer these questions and then wrap up.
I'll just give a couple of quick comments because most of the questions had to do with media functions, and Jeff's the expert here at the table on that. So is it normal to ask another country for unfettered access and to dictate what borders are going to be open? I would say definitely no to the latter. The sanctity of borders and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a country is the duty of the government to protect, defend, promote, and pursue. And any encroachment on those things has to see the government using its own national instruments of power to respond to. Unfettered humanitarian access, yes, this word unfettered, I'll just say access, wide access. It's always preferable to have comprehensive and full aid distribution programs. I think we saw some areas of manipulation as to what areas may not have been getting access, and because narratives became so dominant, not just in Washington but elsewhere and in the media, there was an understanding, whether it was right or not right, that full access wasn't being granted and enabled. And this is where I think the word unfettered came from. But also that goes back to knowledge. And I think there was some assumptions being made about Ethiopia's capacity for humanitarian delivery. And those of us who have worked here for a long time will know that Ethiopia has hosted refugee camps that far outstrip the number of refugee camps elsewhere in the world that, however tragic those settings are, because they're run by the UN and international agencies, often dominate the news on those issues. But if you look at camps in Asosa, in Somali Regional State, etc., and the long experience of the Disaster Management and Relief Agency here, the commission here, there's a long experienced journey that operation has taken, and there was already a framework in place because over 1 million people were food insecure already in Tigray before the conflict. There was a framework in place that was supporting that. So I think it's a combination of, yes, an arrogant position taken on the country and lack of knowledge, the combination of which I would say is a dangerous one. Is there accountability for analysts commenting on the situation? Freedom of academic expression is tied to basic human rights and freedoms, but I think there's a code of conduct. There's certainly a code of conduct in the university that I exist in. I am meant to behave in a certain way that upholds certain principles. I'm assuming that that code of conduct is mirrored elsewhere in the world. The extent to which people are held account, I don't know, but yeah, I would only say that to your question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in terms of accountability because, to be honest with you, as bad as this is, no, there is no legal option and you don't want one, because the minute that you open that door, then you are holding all of us accountable in a legal forum to be decided on who as a legal authority decides what we say we're entitled to say in terms of a political situation. You don't want that. You never want that. There's libel law, which I took in basic journalism class, and then there's political commentary. And the minute that you say, okay, if you say that, off you go, you don't want that. What you can do to fight the Tronvols and the Alex de Walls of the world is fight lies with truth. That's the only thing you can do, which segues into the question in terms of a PR firm. I am not a big fan of PR firms or lobby firms because, keep in mind, PR firms evolved out of journalism. Do you know why? Do you know how PR firms got started? You know who their first client was? The Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. You can check it. It's a fact. That's how PR started. It started by promoting the Klan. And PR firms were originally manned by, I shouldn't say manned, that's sexist, but originally the people who staffed by newspaper guys who knew how the game was played. J.P. Morgan, the story went, he handed out dimes. Well, that was BS. That was a PR term. It was for vested interests. With no offense to the company involved, I've yet to see what fruits of the labor of the PR firm that was hired by the Ethiopian government have achieved. Meanwhile, on the other side, the TPLF went and hired what I call, I can never remember their name, Blattenberg something. I call them Spectre, because the guy literally comes across as a supervillain when he does public appearances, and the tweets are just remarkable, and you're looking at this going, wow, you're pure evil. But their goal is to get the media on their side. Their goal, the lobby firm, is to get you access. Well, that ship has sailed, as far as I'm concerned, to an extent with the US government. Anne may disagree, or maybe we're seeing some edging back to sanity. But in terms of media, what's the point of spending all that money when that door is closed? What you have to do is create alternative media operations where people can go to and say, ah, there's this. To the point in terms of the multiple channels available, well, RT is a propaganda channel for the Russian government. CCTV is a propaganda channel for the Chinese government. I know this. I took part and participated in a documentary on Haile Selassie. I didn't know until later that the company, Camera Pix or whatever it was, that shot the footage was doing it for the Chinese propaganda channel. It's a good documentary, but still a propaganda channel. I worked for them for all of a couple of hours before I walked out and said, okay, I'm not going to do this. I can't sell my soul. Got paid. They're a propaganda channel. Yes, you have the risk that the polarization politically is creating these avenues where it's just, these channels are just a forum for governments. So, be different. Create one of your own. Create a network that is Pan-African, that serves all of Africa, that gets the word out in terms of your truth, your stories, that doesn't serve a regime or a particular government, but serves the interests of your people. I'm not here for the Ethiopian government. I'm not here for any. I was funded by 2 diaspora groups to get the truth in terms of what's happening to the Ethiopian people. Any media operation should be serving the Ethiopian African people. So that's the answer. It's not, let's hire these guys, go deal with these guys who have always lied about us and hope they'll give us time of day. The real plan should be, let's get our own channel where we build the viewership, the readership, and then, you know, people can go, oh, I don't have to listen to the BBC and this BS. I can change the channel. Click, off I go. We're out of time.
Can I just add to that quickly, Danny, and go back to that national framework for scrutiny and accountability on digital governance? If you look at the UN Security Council at the moment, and if we wait for the international community to take a lead on digital governance, we're going to be waiting for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the actors on the Security Council that rely on, let's just say, a different form of digital usage and digital intimidation. So this reinforces the point that even more that I was making earlier, that the nations themselves need to get hold of this. Develop a rubric, a framework to evaluate international and national media. It will do a lot of good in the long term, because look at what Transparency International does with its governance index and its defense governance index. Countries look at the rankings on that index and say, oh, I'm too low, I want to do better, and move up in the ranking. So I think it would generate some media, improved media ethics and accountability. There was one other question on the global order, and is this changing? I mean, I think it is changing, and a lot of the forecasts that were coming out of the BRIC period haven't played out. Others have, and remember the impact of COVID-19, as well as the climate change agenda. So COVID-19 reminded a lot of countries that they needed to be more resilient in their supply chains, have good, quick access to everything they needed to survive as a nation. And there was an economic recession taking place in many regions of the world even before COVID set in. So the world is in a very precarious position economically, and it's waiting for leaders to emerge. And that's where you're seeing a bit of a different world order. And I think the relevance to Ethiopia on that point is that, you know, people are waiting to see what the US does and says. And they're waiting for the US to take the lead, and they've been behind the US lead in many respects, because some of those actors need the US as a close partner in the future. And the US is taking a very accelerated approach to economic pivoting, and pivoting to more sustainable economic futures. And I think people want to be part of that journey. Other countries want to be part of that journey. That is having an impact on what's going on here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Finally, I originally had planned to make this event 4 hours. Guess who convinced me to cut it by half? Anyway, so it's been, yeah, it was a 4-hour event supposed to be. I would have liked. Anyway, thank you so much. Dr. Zodine is the board chairman of Arts, African Renaissance Television Services and Arts Media, among others, that he leads. And Dr. Tagany Work, a UN Under Secretary General for so many years. He is a member of the board of directors. He was supposed to make the thank you note, but he opted out because people are getting tired. So he gave me the baton, so I'm just saying thank you so much, and it's been extremely enlightening. Jeff, it's incredible, as always. It's the first time that I saw you in person, and I'm very impressed by your vigor, as Mr. Jonathan said. He's so passionate, and we're very happy to have you on board. So you have to listen, and you have to, I guess, I suggest that people should read you, as I do. That's why we put his Twitter feed, and Professor Ann's, so many interesting articles every time. Yesterday he wrote about the fixers, the media fixers, a brilliant article. So it would make very great sense. So on behalf of African Renaissance Television Service, on behalf of the people of Ethiopia, on behalf of the intellectuals here, government officials, our staff, and Jeff, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.